We start in Myanmar. Monday marks 1 month since the February 1st coup. The army has been stepping up its crackdown on protests against the takeover, but resistance remains fierce, with demonstrators demanding the release of Aung San Suu Kyi and other leaders. Rosalind de Bavalia in Bangkok has the details.
Fresh charges were laid against Aung San Suu Kyi on Monday. Tensions are high across the country amid reports demonstrators were shot dead by security forces at the weekend, but protesters returned to the streets. Demonstrators split into smaller groups in the country's biggest city, Yangon, on Monday. Riot police used tear gas to break up the gatherings. Sunday was the deadliest day since the military seized power. Security forces fired into crowds of protesters. The UN Human Rights Office said at least 18 people were killed and 30 were injured across the country. The latest bloodshed is drawing international criticism. UN Secretary of State Antony Blinken described it as abhorrent. He said Washington will continue to seek accountability for those responsible. The EU has also indicated it'll take countermeasures, including economic sanctions. Meanwhile, Aung San Suu Kyi made a court appearance by video on Monday. Her lawyer said she faces 2 additional charges, including publishing information that may cause fear or alarm. She already faces charges of illegally importing handheld radios and violating the country's natural disaster management law. Her next hearing is set for March 15th. Joining us in the studio is NHK World's Petra P. Chom-chun. Petra P., it's been over a month since the military takeover, and anti-coup demonstrations have been going on almost as long. So how are the protests different from past gatherings and uprisings?
Well, social media is playing a pivotal role this time. Young people on the streets in Myanmar are tech savvy. They are documenting the protests, even broadcasting them in real time. This exposes any violence by the authorities and at the same time helps mobilize large-scale protests nationwide. The military has responded by blocking Facebook before cutting off the internet intermittently. But the protesters have got around these hurdles by using VPNs. A prominent Yangon-based protest organizer told me the latest rebellion has evolved from those in the past.
This time is more like a digital revolution as well, not just online, not just offline, but also online. And there are different features. For example, young people using creative tactic. There is no specific group, just steering everything. There are many groups taking a lead and taking ownership. So I think these are the differences than the other different protests we had in the history.
Another feature of the ongoing demonstration is the organic spread of strikes, the so-called CDM, or Civil Disobedience Movement. Workers from a wide range of industries, from civil servants to medical personnel, have staged strikes. But the closure of hospitals and banks has impacted people's lives. Whether the military or citizens give up first is a battle of wills.
With pressure growing from the military, do people worry violence like the bloodshed in 1988 uprising could happen again?
Well, the protesters have been using non-violent tactics, but the situation became deadly at the weekend. I met with a former sergeant in the Myanmar army who served in the 1980s and now lives in Thailand. Based on his experience during the 1988 uprising, he said more violence can be expected from the military.
I don't think the military will give up easily. They'll continue using violence against civilians. I think it's possible they'll commit massacres again. They'll try to threaten people's lives as much as possible. But the military won't do things by themselves for the first step. They'll use police and prisoners for the violence.
Well, with international pressure on the junta ramping up, how are Myanmar's neighbors responding?
Well, an online emergency meeting among ASEAN foreign ministers is scheduled on Tuesday, where the Myanmar issue is expected to be discussed. A human rights expert says member countries' divided opinions will limit what the bloc can actually deliver.
I don't think ASEAN is going to succeed in this case. And it's unfortunate because Much of the international community, the European Union, the U.S., Canada, Australia, and others are all making a very big deal about ASEAN playing a leadership role here.
As of now, Myanmar's struggle for democratization seems far from over. A key issue is whether international pressure sways the military.
Thank you, Peter P. And that wraps up our bulletin. I'm Rosalind Bovalia in Bangkok.
Moving to the latest on the coronavirus situation here in Japan. Data shows foot traffic at major train stations is up in 5 of the 6 prefectures where the state of emergency was lifted on Sunday. NHK analyzed data collected by telecom carrier NTT Docomo during the Monday morning rush hour commute in Osaka, Hyogo, Kyoto, Aichi, Gifu, and Fukuoka. Compared to the Monday average for the last 2 months, foot traffic was up 1 to 5% in 5 prefectures. Tokyo and 3 neighboring prefectures are also seeing increases, though the areas are still under the state of emergency. At Tokyo Station, the number was up 6%. New coronavirus cases in the country's capital are decreasing, but the pace is slowing. Nationwide, there were 698 newly confirmed cases on Monday. 51 people died. Japan's government has asked China not to conduct coronavirus tests using anal swabs on Japanese visiting the country. Chief Cabinet Secretary Kato Katsunobu said the government made the request to the Chinese Foreign Ministry and Beijing city authorities. Kato said China is carrying out such tests on people in mass quarantine and some entering the country.
The Japanese embassy in China has received reports from Japanese saying they underwent anal PCR tests after traveling to China and suffered great psychological pain.
Meanwhile, Chinese Foreign Ministry spokesperson Wang Wenbing did not say whether authorities will waive the procedure.
China is adjusting its preventive measures from a scientific viewpoint based on the infection situation.
Chinese media quoted experts as saying samples taken from infected people through anal swabs remain positive longer than those from nasal and throat swabs, helping officials to avoid overlooking carriers of the virus. We now move on to a political scandal involving the son of Japan's prime minister. Suga Yoshihide has apologized for the disruption caused by the resignation of his public relations secretary. Yamada Makiko had been accused of being entertained by a company that Suga's son works for.
The Cabinet Public Relations Secretary resigned at an important period when Diet deliberation is underway. I deeply apologize for causing trouble for all of the public as well as the members of the Diet.
Yamada and nearly a dozen civil servants have been criticized for being wined and dined by representatives of a satellite broadcasting company. She was treated to a meal worth about $700 in 2019 while she was a senior official at the Communications Ministry, which supervises the broadcasting industry. Civil servants are barred by law from accepting hospitality from anyone who could benefit from their positions. Prime Minister Suga's son, who works for the company in question, also attended the dinner. Yamada was scheduled to attend a Diet meeting on Monday to answer questions, but she was hospitalized on Sunday and unable to appear. In that Diet meeting, opposition lawmakers grilled the Prime Minister, saying he has yet to take responsibility.
Most of the public, including myself, believe Ms. Yamada was unable to turn down the invitation to the dinner because the Prime Minister's son was involved.
Honestly, I don't know if there was a cause and effect relationship. I have not spoken with my son about the way things turned out with the Communications Ministry.
The opposition camp says the company would not have entertained the bureaucrats without a motive.
As a result of the wining and dining, we suspect the administration has been swayed in favor of the broadcasting company.
At this point, we have not confirmed any facts pointing to the administration having been influenced.
The communications minister says he's instructed officials to check whether any incidents occurred that might raise suspicion. A big storm will hit many places of Japan on Tuesday. The north could see heavy snow and the rest will experience intense rains. To find out more, we turn to our meteorologist, Sayaka Mori.
Hello there. As opposed to dry February, March 2nd will be unusually stormy for many places of Japan. Last February was one of the driest one in history because Tokyo only saw 5 days of rainy weather. Last time that occurred was nearly 90 years ago. A fire broke out in Ashikaga in Tochigi Prefecture and ended on Monday. Now there is a front and also a low, a very powerful one battering Japan on Tuesday. As you can see, there's a clear boundary here. Cold air is surging in from the north and warm air exists in the south. So mostly rain in Honshu, Shikoku, and Kyushu, but northern Japan, especially Hokkaido, will see significant amounts of snowfall first. We might see nearly 60 centimeters of snow into the next 24 hours. And snow will be changing over to rain in some parts, and also other parts, especially Hokkaido, rather Honshu, will see rain changing over to snow because cooler air is coming in later in the day on Tuesday. The highs will be 17 in Tokyo on Tuesday, Niigata 17 degrees, but that's going to go down sharply at night. You might see rain changing over to snow, so be careful. And sub-zero figures in Sapporo on your Tuesday. For other parts of Asia, temperatures will climb into the double digits. Seoul will see 16 degrees on Friday and 14 degrees in Beijing on your Thursday. Severe weather battered the southeastern United States on Sunday. We saw large hail and damaging winds. The reason is warm air hitting with colder air. So parts of the south, including Augusta, Georgia, had 30.
Our GMA exclusive, the Better Business Bureau scam tracker, reporting that adults 18 to 24 are now more likely to get scammed online than those 65 and older. Ariel Reshef has the details. Good morning, Ariel.
Hey, good morning to you, Michael. You may be surprised by this, but the online scam tracker finds that people 18 to 24 are just as susceptible as the rest of us to falling victim to these online scams. In fact, they're reporting an average of $150 in losses, which is the same as those 65 years old and older. And in 2020, the number of online scam reports rose 38%. Michael, wow. People say this is because we're spending more time online and because we're buying more online as well.
That makes a lot of sense. But what are some of the top scams that people of all ages are falling for?
Yeah, those top scams are for online purchases. So what are we talking about here? We're talking about medical supplies, nutritional supplies, pets, and pet supplies as well, talking about clothing and accessories, vehicles, vehicle parts, and of course those digital devices everybody is buying online.
And so if we know all that, how do we protect ourselves? What does the Better Business Bureau say, or what do they recommend for us?
So their experts are saying here are the tips. Make sure you're aware that these scammers can copy logos and seals. So if a website seems legit or an email, it may not be. You want to be aware of that. Also, you only want to buy online from those websites that have that secure URL, so that HTTPS, and of course that little lock that's in the address bar as well. And you never want to give away your personal information to someone who contacts you unsolicited. And of course, remember, during this pandemic, these scammers, they're very savvy. They're preying on our emotional sensitivity, on the scarcity of products. So be especially vigilant when you're buying anything that's in high demand.
In Myanmar, protesters are back on the streets in defiance at the military as ousted leader Aung San Suu Kyi faces new charges in court. 18 people were killed by the security forces on Sunday. A court in France has found the former President Nicolas Sarkozy guilty of corruption and influence peddling. It's handed him a 3-year prison sentence, 2 of which are suspended. The Duke of Edinburgh has been taken to St Bartholomew's Hospital in central London to undergo tests for an existing heart condition. Prince Philip has spent 13 days at the King Edward VII Hospital being treated for an infection. African countries are starting mass COVID inoculation drives using vaccines supplied through a scheme set up to share doses fairly with poor nations.